Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Star Technology. If you weren't here last time for whatever reason, we got ourselves a fancy new base and AE2 along with everything we needed to start the high voltage tier of energy. HV might honestly be one of my favorite tiers just because how much there is to do, including a solid power upgrade and ore processing, but we're going to need a clean room before we can unlock most of the cool stuff. Between videos, all we did was set up an energy converter, an HV assembler in this temporary spot, and started AE2 integration, as you may have noticed. But we have quite a bit left to do here before auto crafting is super functional, so we're gonna pick up from here. There's a molecular assembler set up for basic crafting recipes that will have to work until we get an auto crafting matrix built. But my first task today is to make the patterns for the AE2 processors and some other basic parts so we can get our patterns operational. You probably remember the multi-smelters from last episode too, but those will handle these alloy smelter and furnace ingot recipes we need here. I'm going to cable over to them real quick and put some barrels on the input buses for these, basically just to increase our input buffers, but I have to run back over to the crafting terminal for more parts first because I haven't made a wireless terminal for AE2 yet. I feel like it's a good time to mention these, but there's a couple tools that everyone should be using with AE2, and the first of these is a pattern modifier. It's useful right now for these multi-smelters because it allows us to easily modify the input and output sizes for these machines that will do parallel recipes. It really only costs 2 green dye, a processor, and a blank pattern, and you just right-click with it in your hand to open it, so definitely craft yourself one of these. And the other crucial tool in my opinion is the quartz knife here. It's also super cheap, but it allows you to rename AE2 parts such as pattern providers by right-clicking them. It honestly just makes it so much easier to navigate your pattern access terminal and to find the correct pattern providers, so it's another definite grab. We have our basics done for AE2 now, so let's get to work on this second floor here, making this clean room. We actually have the floors and walls done here, but I still need to get the filter casings and controller placed down to get this running. I 100% do not recommend starting with a max size clean room, mostly because it took over an hour of off-screen time to build all this, but the rotors for the casings are a bit of a pain in addition to that. A 9x9 or 11x11 is probably a lot more reasonable. I need a full 168 casings for the ceiling, but to save time for your own clean room, I recommend using the fluid solidifier recipe instead of the extruder one. Fast forward a bit though, and we spiced up the second floor here and added these single block racks next to me so we can move our new machines to them. Like I said, this clean room was fairly unreasonably sized, so go with something a bit smaller, but avoid the minimum size because you'll want multi-blocks in here soon enough. Despite my own advice, we have so much decoration in here that we'll have a hard time adding them ourselves, so we'll probably have to rearrange this in a future episode. But it'll do for now, so let's get some HV single blocks put down for crafting. I'm using cable facades to hide the cables running to them, and I ended up deciding that I didn't like how random the machine faces look, so I added computer monitors to give them a more uniform look on the shelves. We also have more single blocks on the racks in the clean room here, including the new MV circuit assembler and other machines required for EV circuits. Though, while I was working on the small decorations down here, Scarlett got us started on that fancy new power method I keep teasing. Power is usually a controversial topic as far as what's considered the best, but it's the best for me because it's probably the least spammy power method that we can set up in HV and make last until ZPM reasonably, with some rotor and hatch upgrades occasionally. The power producers are the large steam turbines here with Lumium rotors and HV dynamo hatches, and these should spin up to a full 2 amps of HV per multi-block. The best way to make sure you're using the best rotor for your tier is to always use the same superconductor alloy you use for your best energy converter for that same tier. For the steam to produce power with these, we're just using lapidary boilers from the Thermal Series mod again. In them, we just have an HV upgrade kit and 3 injector kits for efficiency that will get upgraded to EV later. If you're wondering why there's no recipe for lapidary boilers, then it must suck to be you! Kidding, of course, the secret is to shift right click a dynamo with a steam pipe. The diamonds we're burning in these are just coming from our create setup still, which is fine because it seems to be keeping up, but as we add more stacks of steam turbines, at some point we'll have to make a mechanical sieve or 4 to support our ever-increasing diamond demands. This will at least get us started with 8 amps of HV, but we'll certainly have to expand on this by quite a bit before the episode is over, since we still have ore processing, titanium, other passive lines, and auto crafting to get done, and our quad EBF alone will consume all of this after it's upgraded. The most expensive part of the turbines are the rotors, so the structures themselves aren't that bad at least. The biggest real drawback to using these, however, is that they'll spin down and quit producing power if their buffers are full. But with enough gargantuan flux storages for power storage, we should be able to mostly eliminate this as a big problem soon enough. There's still a few steps before we get to that though, but my main focus now is to get ourselves CubeJS machines for auto crafting and ore processing primarily. The first step to this goal is to build a vacuum freezer, which is pretty quick and cheap to build, with the EV circuits being the bulk of the cost currently. Now, instead of those stinky slow chem baths to cool ingots, we can use this instead, which, besides it being faster, it can also cool down hotter ingots, including the ones we'll need for various CubeJS machines. We're just using a tag export bus with this tag to make sure all of our hot ingots get sent here after they get outputted into AE2. On to the next item on our to-do list for CubeJS though, we have to upgrade these EBFs again to EV overclocking. Like I said earlier, it will probably kill our power, but we need it for these CubeJS alloys, so we'll just have to adjust and hope our create setup will carry the rest of our needs for the time being. Easy enough to upgrade, but now I have to set all the patterns for the multi-blocks. You'll probably be spending a lot of time setting patterns in this pack, but it sure beats handcrafting, so I really can't complain about it. You may have noticed me running around with topaz to get it processed down here every once in a while, and that's just so I can electrolyze the dust for fluorine to make polytetrafluoroethylene later on for the large chemical reactor. Fluorine is a bit annoying here before ore processing is set up, so I recommend just hand processing some occasionally, like I am, while you wait on things to get your first bit. We'll have passive fluorine after ore proc is done, but I'm just going to autocraft PTFE and, for that matter, every other polymer for the rest of the pack, because I'm not a fan of dedicating power and infrastructure to plastics that tend to lose relevance later on in progression. It's a bit slow for now, but after we get an overclocked LCR in here, that will be taken care of. Anyways, I'm going to have to take some AFK time to wait on ingots for these wonderful CubeJS machines, so I'll be back once I have enough casings for our first quad. Alright, so we're back with an extruder built for auto crafting. I still need to hook it up to AE2, but if you're wondering what all the rage is about these CubeJS multi-blocks, the answer is perfect overclocking. One of the most common questions I see for Star Technology is, how do I make a machine perfect overclock? And for those of you who aren't in the know, the answer is, you don't. A more in-depth response is that if a machine has the perfect overclock function, it will automatically do that, indicated by the tooltip when you hover over a multi-block controller in JEI. Normally, when you apply a higher tier of energy to a recipe, it consumes 4 times as much power, but only works twice as fast per tier. With multi-blocks that have perfect overclocking, however, each additional tier of power multiplies the recipe speed by 4 times as well, meaning that there's no additional power usage for overclocking on top of being faster. My first one is the extruder here, because those are such a bottleneck at this tier of progression, but starting with the mixer multi is just as valid considering that these CubeJS machines use the mixer extensively when crafting them. I'm going to set my patterns for PTFE and LCRs now that the extruder is ready to go, so the next step after this is to just get it ordered. During that process, Scarlett upgraded our power a bit, so we have some extra room to breathe with our energy situation for the time being. We're up to 16 amps of HV now, though you best believe it will still need more expanding before this episode is over. But let's get down here to the first floor to take a look at our shiny new LCR. The AE2 on this is kinda screwed up, so don't try to copy this by any means, but I'm just going to hope I don't hit any recipe issues until after we unlock the EV quadruple input hatches, because making this work properly will be hard to do without them. I also totally hate what I did with these wireless connectors here, so in a bit I'll have to fix this and try to move all the hatches to the top side of the LCR. I have an auto crafting tutorial, so you can check that out for yourself, but please don't copy this setup because the only way it's working for long is on a prayer. I'll link my AE2 guide playlist in the description for those who need it, so you don't have to worry about my bad example of an LCR here. Anyways, we're having actual power issues now when we're waiting for turbines to spin up, so the new top priority is Flux networks for storage. The redstone that it costs might as well be dirt, but probably make sure you at least have semi-decent lava set up before you start printing these off, because each one of the gargantuan storages costs a good bit of lava to craft up. And while I was waiting on flux storages, we ended up starting on our ore processing and production floor, but unfortunately I managed to corrupt the footage of us starting this floor. What we have done so far is most of slurry processing, but this is pretty much just raw ore slurry and rare ore residue bouncing back and forth between the electrolyzer and centrifuge to produce extra resources, with a distillation tower and autoclaves for the rarer ores we'll need for EV and IV. If you're struggling to set this up for yourself, I suggest writing the steps out on a piece of paper to visualize it, because it's really just 4 different machines. Now, I'm not sure if I have to give this explanation, but I have seen some confusion on it before in the past, so I'm going to cover Flux networks real quick. If you're already familiar with it, just skip forward 30 seconds. Anyways, if you don't have a network already, go to the top right here to create a new network. You can name it and change the color in this tab. If you're on a public server, probably set it to private so other people don't leech off your power. Encrypted just requires a password for new people to access it, so maybe use that setting if you have teammates. Once the network is up though, you can just select the network on the point by going to this second tab here, then finally make sure to turn on bypass limit if the machine will be consuming more than the limit, though that shouldn't be a problem until LUV at least. Finally, I'm going to hook these wires up to give these autoclaves energy. I still have one more machine to set up before slurry processing is complete, being the distillation towers here. I'm just going to wall share 2 towers right here along the pillar with the cables hidden underneath it here mostly. These pesky distillation towers are a bit picky about hatch placement, but basically only the input hatch, energy hatch, and output bus go on the bottom row. After that, it's just 1 output hatch per layer. Quad outputs don't work though. I know someone was bound to ask if I didn't mention it. This next part here might be the most important part of our infrastructure for the mid-game, next to our power setup, and that's ore processing. If you're sitting there asking, weren't you already working on ore proc? To which I reply, no! Rare ore residue is not ore processing, and I have a slurry of insults for anyone who says otherwise, because it's actually a part of ore generation, which comes before processing. It's all ultimately a part of resource generation, but people tend to confuse the terms resource generation and ore proc in the community. To help clear up the confusion, resource gen has 3 main steps. The first part is ore generation. Ore generation includes sieving, rock filtrators, void extractors, and the slurry line because they all generate ores. The next step is the actual ore processing part, and this includes only the steps you see on these tabs in JEI. Ore proc is simply all the steps in between the raw ores and the dust. Everything after this is the next step, post-processing, which is mostly just the electrolysis or centrifugal recipes that break down the ore dust into single element dusts or fluids. With that clarification understood, let's go over the ore processing setup we made. Honestly, getting deep into this setup would take a bit more time than I have for this video, so I'm just going to give it a quick rundown. Our entire ore processing is on this green subnet here, and these short pipe subnets filter what gets sent to the input buses with tag storage buses. Later on, I'll replace these tag export buses by using stocking input hatches, but for now we're just using these with an asterisk to have them export everything they're allowed to see on the pipe subnets they have. I have a table I made for what tags I use and what ores I process if you're interested in it, so I'll leave that up for a few seconds so you can screenshot that if you want, but ideally I make a more in-depth tutorial on ore processing in the future. This setup here is just too compact to make a good example set. You don't have to worry about making your ore proc as bulky as mine, but definitely invest as much time as you're willing to put into this because good ore processing will only become more important as we progress here. Moving on from ore processing though, we have one more very important milestone before we're ready to wrap this up and move on to extreme voltage, and that milestone is passive titanium. Before we set up titanium, however, it's time we made a proper area to put our EBFs and freezers into, including the EBFs we'll use for titanium, so I'll be back once Scarlett and I get an area ready. So, breaking news actually, we decided to expand the base entirely to a new building, and we're actually starting to get a vision of what we want this base to look like by the end of this pack. Soon enough, we should have 4 differently colored towers with 5 floors apiece and a nice center plaza there in the middle. At the time of recording, we're not sure what colors we'll choose for the other 2 buildings, but now that this red one exists and has space for these EBFs, let's get up to the top floor, that orange building, to get the first part of titanium done. Titanium is also fairly easy, but I do have the time to walk you through this one, so let's get right into it. Step 1 is to process the ilmenite or bauxite for rutile dust. As long as you made a good ore proc like I told you to, this one should be a piece of cake. Step 2 is to get a couple stacks of carbon, magnesium, and some chlorine, and then put them in a closed subnet with your electrolyzer and LCRs. Make sure to show the subnet that rutile from the mainnet, then set the inputs chlorine, rutile, and carbon on your LCR. This will produce titanium tetrachloride and carbon monoxide. Step 3 is to make those EBFs and input the magnesium and titanium tetrachloride to them. This will cook into magnesium chloride and hot titanium ingots for us. The fourth and final step is to electrolyze the carbon monoxide and magnesium chloride into basic ingredients that we recycle back into our LCRs. All we do now is add a drive and cells, then show the titanium and oxygen products to our mainnet. Finally, I suggest adding an overflow destruction card to destroy any excess oxygen so it doesn't clog up our subnet. With titanium set up though, this means that we're 100% ready to start the next tier of energy, so this is where I sign off for today. As always, thanks for watching to the end, and be sure to leave any questions in the comment section. With that, I'll see you on the next one. Ciao!